I can talk a lot about that.
Good evening and welcome to Voices from the Village. I'm Louis LaFortune. Tonight our show is entitled Creating a Livable World. And we're going to be looking at really about the big issues about how people live, how much money they make, how much it costs to live in terms of food and housing and all these other issues that people have to deal with on a daily basis, economic issues. So that's what we're going to talk about. And I have a well-qualified guest here tonight. This is David Kaun. Well, thank you for joining us.
A pleasure.
And David Kaun, you are a professor emeritus, newly retired professor.
Yes, so a few days ago.
Okay, of economics.
Yes.
At UCSC.
That's correct.
All right. So I know you have a lot of, you've done a lot of thinking and reading and writing on this subject. So thank you for joining us.
I'm glad to be here.
I feel honored to have such a knowledgeable person on the show. So we're going to start off with this problem of housing in not just Santa Cruz County, in the entire country. As all of my viewers know, homelessness is a huge problem in this country. And it's not just, we're not going to just talk about the problem of homelessness, however. What do we do about it? And we're going to start off with this film clip, and the film clip is about a program here that's newly created in Santa Cruz County. And this is going to be our jumping off point for our larger discussion. So the program is called the 180-180 program, and it uses numbers. Studies have determined that a very small number of people who are not housed use a huge percentage of public services, health services, police, ambulance transportation, all of the services that are involved with helping homeless people who have medical issues. So this program is intended to address that by putting these people in housing. And we're going to let one of the principals of this program explain it to us in the short film clip, and then we'll talk more about it. So let's have that now, please.
180 campaign in Santa Cruz is part of a national campaign called the 100,000 Homes Campaign. And what we did this week is called our Registry Week. We involved over 100 volunteers to go out with us in the community in the early morning hours, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then throughout the day. And we interviewed over 300, I think it was 355 homeless individuals, people who were sleeping out or in shelters. We interviewed them at their place where they slept oftentimes, or at places where they were receiving services, catching a meal on their way into shelters. And what we did was find out from them what are the factors that they're experiencing that would, as we know from research, predict that they're at risk for early mortality on the streets. And we then took their photo, we have their name, we know how to find them and what issues put them in rank order for highest risk, and then we joined together as a community and said we are going to go out and get those people and link them with permanent supportive housing, assist them to be housed, and end homelessness.
So that was Christine Sippel of the 180-180 program, and you can find out more about that at their website, santacruz180.org. We are planning to do an entire show about this program in the future. It didn't work out for this evening's show, but I wanted to start out with that because it's an economic issue as well as Christine Sippel said, a human rights issue. The people that they have identified are at great risk for mortality, for dying, if they don't get off the street because their medical needs are so great. Well, so there's that moral issue. And then what it turns out, as people have looked at this problem nationwide, that if we house people who are in greatest need, we actually save money as a society. We save public dollars. So it is a, as one of the principals involved with the program said, it is a win-win. The homeless people win, they get a house, and we win, the public, who are taxpayers who support these people. Let me give you a couple of numbers here. There are an estimated 2,700 homeless people on the streets of Santa Cruz County, but only about 10 to 15% of them account for 70% of the costs incurred by countywide services. So again, the idea is that if we can house these people, we'll drastically reduce their need for services, and we save money. So, David Kaun, you're an economist. This sounds like a sensible way to approach it. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, let me start by telling you why I'm here.
Sure.
If I may. I guess it was maybe 2 months ago, a woman named Georgia Perry, who writes for the Santa Cruz Weekly, contacted me and asked if I would be willing to be interviewed about the 180 program. And I said, what's the 180 program? And she told me what it was. And I said, well, I didn't really know a lot. She sent me some material, but I've been interested in these broad issues for a long period of time, number one. And number two, say for some really esoteric topics, I've never turned down an opportunity to talk. And that's in a sense why I'm here right now. So that it was interesting what I learned. The 180 program got very, very nice coverage in Georgia Perry's article. Let me get the date. The people who are interested can check this. The Santa Cruz Weekly, the July 4th through 10th issue. And there was also a very nice story in the Sentinel on the topic, and a very good story in Good Times. But not to sound overly biased, George's article is really substantial and considerably more depth than the other two. It's really quite amazing when you think about it, the misconception in the first place. This was one of the things I learned in just getting involved in this. Most of us think about the homeless on the basis of the people we see. And the people we see are the people sitting on the streets, oftentimes less than attractive in one way or another. And, you know, there's all sorts of negative things that are said. Why don't they just go get a job, and so forth and so on. And the close to 3,000 homeless in Santa Cruz, the really interesting fact is close to 70% of the homeless are literally families, husbands, wives with kids, who have been put out of work with, this is the worst economic times that I think, unless you're as old as I am or older, that anybody has experienced in the United States. So the times are really, really tough. And so one of the very first things that impressed me about thinking about all this is we have a very misguided notion of the homeless. It's very widespread. The second issue with respect to the 180 is it's quite an interesting program, modeled after, I think, a successful, probably 5 years, roughly speaking, in New York. There's a similar program in Boston and a similar program in Los Angeles. Interesting if you notice where these programs are. On the East Coast and the West Coast, with sort of the bluish parts of the country in some ways. Designed to, I'm not sure if it's, you know, the numbers of people that are going to be helped, the numbers themselves are really small. On the other hand, the potential help for those people is tremendous. The idea is to get, and this is surprising, it's surprising to me, to get the most needy and destitute, in trouble individuals who are homeless into housing. That is taking on the toughest tasks going. And again, I haven't spent a lot of time on this. My casual understanding is these programs are showing success in the cities I just mentioned. And it's not surprising that Santa Cruz would be another place where people in this town, this really thoughtful community, are trying to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm. So again, would you want to comment on the economics of it?
Well, the economics of it are, in some ways, they're always very important. They're always very important. Roughly speaking, and these are just numbers on the top of my head, it's very similar to the cost of resurrecting an inmate from prison and having that person have a successful, productive life, or keeping them in prison. The costs of maintaining the homeless as they exist now are enormous, roughly speaking, compared to the costs that would be incurred if they had homes. There certain costs are higher. It was interesting. The cost of treatment, once the people are involved in these programs, the treatment costs, drug addiction and so forth, are significantly higher than for the people on the streets, because the people on the streets aren't getting the need and care that they deserve and they must have. But overall, the cost savings are, I don't want to give a number because I don't remember precisely what it is, but the cost savings are clear. The other thing in an important way, I mean, in our society, we always talk about the costs, the cost savings. But it's in a sense an important thing to do. I mean, these are the most needy. You know, I'm not overly religious, but just ask yourself, what would Jesus do? Right?
Well, I was just thinking of Jesus when you were speaking.
There's no way on earth
what did he say,
that Jesus wouldn't be fully in support.
Right. I think he said something along the lines of, our focus should be on the least of us.
Absolutely.
The least among us.
Right.
That's the people that we need to serve.
Right.
And he was making a moral argument, I think, rather than an economic one.
Right, and that's my point. That's my point as well, that this is the right thing to do.
It's the right thing to do.
And it's very tough. We can get off track and we can come back to this for a minute. The interesting thing about the United States in regard to this kind of program and other kinds of programs where there's similar need is we lag. This is our nature of the United States society. We lag the Western world and always have in all kinds of social welfare measures. We're the last, we do the least, and part of it is, and there's some pluses on this, the strong individual ethic in this country, which has served us well in many respects, does in this area lead Americans roughly 2 to 1, 2.5 to 1, to see the homeless as the problem with that lazy bum. Whereas in Europe and other countries, the numbers are exactly the reverse. They understand many people are in difficult straits, not because of their own circumstance, but social problems and other things that are out of their control.
We'll talk more about the numbers here in a minute, but I do have to let our viewers know this is a live program tonight, August 12th, 2012. The phone number here at the studio is 425-8844. Please feel free to call with your comment or question. Our topic tonight is creating a livable world, and my guest is the Professor Emeritus of Economics.
Funny to hear that title, but go ahead.
David Kaun, newly retired professor, although I understand you're still teaching.
Yes, right. We have a program in the social sciences where it's a phased retirement.
Okay.
One might say I've been in phased retirement for 40 years, but yeah, so I will, if I stay healthy and so forth, will continue teaching at the university, but at a reduced rate. Not financially, a reduced number of classes.
Oh, all right.
No way will they reduce the rate. I'm an economist after all.
Okay. Well, good luck. That sounds like a nice arrangement.
It is.
So let me go back to the numbers on this. I just wanted to flesh this out a little bit, and that again, 10% of the people account for 70% of the costs. According to this article here, this is the Good Times. Joel Hirsch is the author of this. I just wanted to give him credit for that. The cost of a hospital admission, average, $8,500. Ambulance transportation. I would love someone to tell me why it costs so much to get in an ambulance, but it's something like $2,400 for an ambulance trip. I don't get that. And if you're going to be, the police are relatively cheap. The sheriff, to be booked for a night is $119, and the bed is $98. So that's fairly inexpensive compared to these other huge costs. So the cost of having these people on the street in medical distress, and then having to transport them and then to admit them is enormous. So they have found, again, in the national program, and the national program is called Housing 100. Oh, there it is, 100,000 homes. And they have found that this is a real money saver. In LA, they have numbers that show that they are saving money with this while actually giving help to people. So it's, I just wanted to get people to understand that the numbers on this thing. And again, we're planning to do another show about that where we get fuller picture of that program. So, but our title tonight, again, I want to get back to that, is Creating a Livable World. And part of it, like we were just talking about Jesus, what do we do about the least among us, right? Right. That's a livable world. And some wise person said to me years and years ago, no one is happy unless everyone is happy. And I didn't get that. And as I've grown older, I understand now that when there are people in distress, for whatever reason, they cause problems for everyone. So people on the street causes a problem for merchants or for whoever. And that's just one example. So unless everyone is happy, that is, has some level of comfort and, feeling safety and security, then the rest of us will have problems, even if we don't have that particular problem. So I thought of that when I saw this story.
Well, can I interject?
Sure. Yeah.
That's true if everyone is aware of everyone. And that is not the case. And I was just in the context of thinking about tonight and the problems of the homeless. Michael Harrington wrote a book in the 60s entitled The Other America, precisely the same issue. And I forget, John Kenneth Galbraith wrote a book as well. And one of these two authors, I forget which one, Galbraith, dealing with the same issue, was if you're living in gated communities or if you're flying over the neighborhoods that are way down below, there's a lot of, and it was just like the experience I mentioned a few minutes ago about the homeless. My experience, direct experience with the homeless, was the, relatively speaking, younger men sitting on the streets. And so a good portion of the problem is becoming aware. And so, that's why obviously shows like this and other efforts to make these kinds of needs available, understandable to the broader society are terribly important.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So tell me about your work with economics on a macro level, on the national level, wages, and you're interested in this. We have there was a campaign in this city to raise the minimum wage several years ago, which did not succeed. But other cities have done that. The minimum wage in California is, I believe, $8.50 an hour. Nationally, it's $7.25, $7.25 an hour. That's the federal minimum wage. Many people believe that it's way too low. I read an article today in which I learned, I did not know this, this is Ralph Nader writing on this, that the United States is lower than any other major Western nation. In France, the minimum wage is over $11, and in Canada, the minimum wage ranges from $9.40 to $11. Plus, Mr. Nader points out, the Canadians and the French have a much better social safety net. That is their health. Their health costs are next to nothing because of their single-payer style healthcare systems. So these wages are even higher than they would be here. So you want to comment on that? I know you've done a lot of work on the minimum wage. How would that affect this whole problem?
Well, right. We should tell the viewers that before the show started, I said, please ask about the minimum wage because that's the only thing I really know something about. I did my dissertation on the federal minimum wage. It was a rather long time ago. But the United States is unique. I indicated the low level of the safety net, whatever element of the safety net we're talking about. And it's the same thing. We're stuck with two aspects of the minimum wage that just are ridiculous in one sense. The first is that there's only one minimum wage. There's a minimum wage. There's a federal minimum wage. Now, you indicated that some states are able to raise the wage slightly higher if the cost of living. But the federal minimum wage applies across the nation, despite the fact that cost of living in New York is very different than it is in Louisiana. And that's always been the case, that sort of fundamental difference. The other issue, equally perverse in a sense, and especially if you have a political environment that we have today, is the minimum wage is not based on anything other than what Congress sets it to be. That is, the minimum wage, I don't remember the last time it was raised, but it's probably between 5 and 10 years ago. So that the minimum wage of $7.25 or $7.50, the federal minimum wage now, has been that wage for at least 5 to 7 years, while the average wages have gone now recently rather slowly. But if you look at the post-war period from the 50s, mid-40s on to the present, the minimum wage starts at, roughly speaking, when they enact the minimum wage, 60% of the average wage in manufacturing. Then the average wage in manufacturing rises and the minimum wage stays, so it gets less and less effective. Then Congress gets around to enacting it again and jacking it up, so that it's at the hands of the political system to a much greater extent than if it simply would be based on some index of cost of living. So those are the two perverse elements, and the reason you're able to, I forget which country, but most other countries will have different minimum wages. Why should the minimum wage for a 17 or 18-year-old be the same as for an adult, and so forth and so on? So that's it. Our minimum wage is designed to be the least effective, and it is.
Oh, it's by design, okay. And so, well, we can ask about who does that benefit. I just want to add some more information here in Mr. Nader's article. He points out that poll after poll shows that 70%, almost 3/4 of people polled, support having the minimum wage keep up with inflation, to be indexed, as you were just saying.
Totally right.
And he points out, in fact, that even Rick Santorum and Mitt Romney have, at one point in their political careers, endorsed this idea.
Well, no, that's not evidence for anything.
That's what he
they
says.
have endorsed everything.
Oh, okay.
So, right, and I would not use those arguments.
You would not.
Right, because, right.
But
and they would deny it anyway.
What he was, oh, I'm sure they would. Yeah, and he also points that out. But many conservatives endorse this idea that as the cost of living, as general wages rise, or inflation rises, ridiculous. The minimum wage.
On the face of it, it's just simply perverse.
Yeah, no.
Every 6 or 7 years, the low-wage people ought to have a decent living, and then 6 or 7 years later, let's fix them again. It's ridiculous.
And Mr. Nader starts out his article by saying that we need a minimum wage of $10 per hour, which is slightly less than we had in 1968, adjusted for inflation. So that would only be catching up with that level.
Well, that would be $20,000.
Yeah.
Right?
So I understand
$20,000.
the poverty level in this country is now 19,500.
Okay, I honestly
something like
don't know
that.
what that number is. Right, it's right. But whatever it is, it's easy to understand that $20,000 is. I mean, that is, that's one adult. If you had two adults in a family working, that'd be fine. But there are lots and lots and lots of families these days with single family, single moms, single dads. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's still not a living wage, but
no.
Right. Well, it's significantly greater than what it is now.
So $10 would produce an annual income of $20,000.
Right.
$10.
Well, on the assumption of 2,000 hours, right?
Something.
Right.
Okay. All right. Nader argues that many corporatists, like the vice president of Costco, says, well, we don't use the minimum wage. We use $11 an hour for our new hires because we know that we get better people that way. So he thinks it makes good sense to pay people more money. And let me get back to this idea of the cost to the whole economy. Nader points out that if we had a $10 minimum wage, that the current minimum wage earners would be making an additional $2,000 to $4,500 a year. So that would bring them up significantly. And this then would reduce their burden on the rest of us as taxpayers, because now, he says, they're using a larger portion of public services because they can't afford to pay for them.
Right.
So
right. And assuming that, I mean, if you just made the assumption, which is somewhat of a heroic assumption, that you simply raise the wages of those who are working at the minimum wage now of whatever the state in California, $8 plus, raised it to 10, and there was no employment loss. There might be a little bit of employment loss. Generally speaking, this is one of the arguments that conservatives use regularly and incorrectly, is that if you raise the minimum wage, it will cause significant unemployment. All the studies deny that. There's no way does that happen in any significant way. On occasion, there are some employment effects. So it would have a significant impact on spending. And one of the problems, of course, today is there is no spending or not sufficient spending in our economy. The unemployment rate is whatever, 8.4% now, 8.3%. We're stuck. We're stuck because there isn't sufficient demand.
Right. Yes. And you're echoing what Nader said in here. I know you haven't read this, but it will create jobs because sales will increase. Yeah. People will have more money to spend.
The people who are getting this is another thing that's so perverse about the discussion we're having today. The people who will get the income as minimum wage earners will spend it. The Romney-Ryan plan, or it's the Ryan plan, but presumably Romney, at least today, will endorse it. He did for a short while. He may change his mind, of reducing the tax rate on the wealthiest people on the idea that if they have the money they will invest is utter nonsense. It's what used to be called supply-side economics. It's what Mankiw, who became Bush's Council of Economic Advisors, in his first major economist at Harvard, his first textbook wrote the notion that supply-side economics, which is precisely what the present Ryan tax idea is to cut the rates at the high level, at the highest level. They'll then have money to invest. They ain't going to invest it unless people are spending. And the only way you get people spending. So this is the debate. And it's interesting, sad. Mankiw wrote that in his first book, in his first edition of Introductory Economics, supply-side economics, which you can call the Ryan plan today, is voodoo economics. Even George Bush I used that term. it's right back in vogue.
Yeah, yes, it was. I remember that era when was it David Stockman? Was he Reagan's guy?
Yes, he was. But unfortunately, he got in trouble by sort of admitting that this was all one of my favorite television personalities would have said, "This is all bullpucky."
So I remember Stockton was Reagan's guy, and he said he was originally a proponent of this.
No. But he wasn't. No, he was a proponent.
And then,
but he knew it was bullshit.
Okay.
I hope you got that
That's
last
okay.
word
It's okay.
out. Right.
I don't think they're going to come down on us for that.
Okay, good.
So
Stockman admitted.
Stockman, that was his name.
Yes, he admitted they knew damn well this was just crap.
So this is the first time I heard about it. Was the supply side? And Reagan used the term, or somebody used the term, trickle down.
It's trickle down,
right?
And that's the argument you're hearing right now. That's the sort of sad thing. It's really sad. I mean, get off the subject and come right back to it. In the Depression, in the 30s, there was what was called the Keynesian Revolution. And it was called a revolution because prior to that, we thought that if economic times are bad, the thing for the government to do is get the hell out of the way and cut back. A disaster. And Keynes comes along, no ideological motives here, and realizes this is ridiculous. That when there's idle resources and private sector is not spending and hiring people, so that was what Keynesian economics is all about. We're having the sad thing is we're having precisely the same debate today. And the Ryan, whatever, is supply side economics. It's sad. So I'm sorry to go on because it bothers me a lot. We don't seem to have learned anything.
Yeah. So John Maynard Keynes, you're referring to, the great economist, and his ideas were embraced by Roosevelt, right? Who created the New Deal and massive government spending in an effort to turn the economy around. It didn't work, but
it did and didn't work. It depended on what you mean by massive. It absolutely worked. It was called World War II.
Well, that was
massive government spending.
Yes, no, you're right. And and this is a problem. We always seem to have plenty of money to wage wars, and so massive spending, which lifts the economy. But in peacetime, they turn off the spigot. It's just, that's a whole other show, I guess, about war spending versus peacetime spending. Why can't we spend a lot of money during peacetime if there's a need? That's my opinion. Well, yes, and Romney is not, he believes in this idea that if you cut taxes on the wealthy, that they will, he calls them the job creators.
They're job creators.
Now, what is wrong with that? Are they not job creators? Of
course they're not job creators.
Okay.
If there are factories sitting with productive capacity and nobody's buying anything, why should Mr. Moneybags build another factory? It's that simple. It's plain and that simple. So
no matter how many tax cuts we give the wealthy, you're saying, there's no incentive for them to increase production capacity because there's nobody. People can't afford to buy what they make.
Right. The two terms to keep this discussion relatively simple and straightforward are demand and supply. The supply-siders say, if you create the goods, people will buy. Create the supply, people will buy. Well, people won't buy if they don't have the income. Now, the supply-siders will argue, well, yes, but in order to create the goods, you will have to pay people. But if you've got, again, to repeat, if you've got idle resources, they're not going to expand their productive capacity. The Keynesian argument is quite simple, as we were just talking about a few minutes ago with respect to the minimum wage. Put money into people's hands, low-income people, middle-income people, people who aren't saving any significant amount, who have needs for their kids and so forth and so on, and they'll spend it. And the minute spending starts, believe me, the firms will start producing, they'll start hiring, they'll start expanding, but they won't do that unless there's a spending. So those are the two views, and somehow It's hard. Well, it's hard for me to understand, other than the fact that really what's going on is ideology here. This is the strong thing that's driving people. Who do you really care about?
Yeah. So we had the massive tax cuts for the wealthy during the Bush era, and those have still in place, right? Those have not gone away.
Right.
I don't know what Obama's doing nothing about this.
Well,
he talks about ending it, but I think he when it came to him, he did sign that, right? To continue those cuts?
Yes and no. This is how I understand what's happened in the last year or two or three with respect to the existing tax system. Obama has given lip service to cutting taxes for all but the highest income levels. Lip service. The Republicans have been successful in saying, sorry, we ain't going to do anything unless you do it our way. Now, my understanding is the present situation is that all of those Bush tax cuts, all of the tax cuts, will go out of existence on, I don't know the date, January 1, January 12th, I'm simply not sure. Obama, at the moment, finally, I don't want to sound overly political here, is showing a little bit of backbone in saying, no, we're going to either cut taxes on the bottom 98% and leave and increase taxes on that. Increased taxes simply means go back to the old tax rates for the wealthier people, or I ain't signing anything. And so right now there is an absolute, they're at loggerheads to see who's going to blink. It's not clear what's going to happen, but there is some evidence that all of the tax cuts will vanish at whenever that is, January 1st, 12th, as I say, I'm not sure. And then Congress is going to have to deal with it all over again. And there's hope in that sense that when that happens, then Congress will be able to get a tax policy that is a little bit more accommodating to common sense than the present one.
Another issue which you just touched on there is, as Ralph Nader brings up in the article, is how much money these people do make. Where is that item? It was quite striking. He does have a way with numbers. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't put my finger on it. But what I believe he said was that before the business executive, the CEO of a major corporation, before he goes to, there it is, the top executive compensation last year was $9.4 million. That was the average, okay, at these firms, the 50 largest firms. This means that the bosses, before taking lunch on January the 2nd, the second day of the year, have made more money that year, in 2 days, than a minimum wage worker makes for the entire year. So they're making $20,000 a day or more than that. And the billions and billions of dollars that these people have, the top 1%, if that were taxed, like you said, restore the old tax rate, we would have plenty of money. So this is the argument of many people. It's not that we have it's not the economy's broke or the country's broke or we're spending too much. The revenue, there's just no revenue. So can you talk about the historical tax rates in this country on the wealthy? I remember that they were, well, they were huge numbers.
Right.
What were they?
Coming out of the Second World War, the marginal, you have to understand, people get confused when you say the marginal tax rate. When you say 90%, the wealthy are paying 90%. Oh my God, how can they do that?
Well, explain that. What does that mean?
All that means is the wealthy pay exactly the same tax rate as the lowest income people on the first portion of their taxes, say from $20,000 to $40,000. Everybody's paying the same tax rate, 10%, 12%, whatever the number is. Then on the next bracket, depending on how many tax rates there are, the wealthy are paying the same as the upper middle income people. So it's only on the very last bit, whatever that bit turns out to be, where the tax rate oftentimes, I'm just off the top of my head, roughly speaking, it might apply to 10% of a person's income at the highest level, is paying the marginal tax rate coming out of the Second World War was, I think it was 90%, comes down to about 70%, and then it's with the Reagan era that the economic circumstances in terms of economic distribution in our society begins to change dramatically. And so back to the Nader commentary on what the CEO makes today. If you looked at historically, the average pay of, say, Fortune 500 CEOs, some top group, relative to the average pay of the worker in the corporate sector, roughly speaking, 40 times, something like that. And so if you look at over time, that's 40%, and those numbers, that 40%, 39%, 42%, are similar across Western countries. Comes 1980, the United States and Great Britain, called Ronald Reagan and Maggie Thatcher, changed their economic policies of these two countries in a dramatic way, and including the tax situation, where the difference between the corporate executive and the average worker in his or her firm starts to rise to 100, 200, 300 times. And those figures for the United States, there's studies done, easy graphs, I use these in introductory economics. That's not the case in the rest of the Western world. The United States and Great Britain have somehow or other, in the United States in the extreme, we're outliers in that regard. And it's been, well, you know, if you believe that government is not the solution and it's the problem, and you want government to get the hell out of the way, this is what we have. In a number of areas, poverty levels have gone up, and income inequality has gone up, and corporate pay has gone up, all the same set of policies.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, yeah, I have heard these numbers. I remember when Nader ran for president, and I don't know which particular campaign it was, but he always makes a point of this, of pointing out that number that you just used, 200 to 300 times. Right. At one point he used, I remember using number 413 times. This was apparently a high point.
That probably so, right.
But I just made a correlation here between what he's saying here. So the CEO, on his first day at work, he makes what the minimum wage worker makes in an entire year. Well, that would be 365 to 1. If you want to think about it, if you want to think about it that way.
No, those are the numbers, right? Of
course.
And remember, again, they used to be around 40 times, not 360. 40. It used to be around 40.
Yes. Right. So, yeah, and it's astonishing. I tell people this because I remember when the marginal tax rate was 90%. Yeah. You know, it was in the 1960s, 1970s.
Well, I don't think it stayed at 90 very long. I honestly don't know, but it started after the Second World War at 90.
There,
right, absolutely.
It started out there, yeah. And again, so it's important for people to understand that that's not 90% of everything they make. Right. It's only 90% of what they make after the first million or
right.
whatever.
Right.
And if you can't manage to live on $1 million, well, then you need to look at your own personal budget, I think. So, you know, these people, we get the impression they think they're going to be on the street if we take more of their money. No, they have plenty of money. So let me remind our viewers again, this is a live program. There it is, 425-8844 is our phone number if you have a comment or question. My guest tonight is Professor David Kaun, Professor Emeritus, newly retired, of economics at University of California right here in Santa Cruz. And tell me about your own progression. You came here in the 60s when UCSC was new?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Right. I came here in 1966. I want to talk about one other thing
sure,
that I
go
was
ahead.
just involved with that relates to what we're talking about. I came in February of 1966, stayed at the home of Jack Baskin, who's a major benefactor, and I met stormy weather, and they took us up to the campus. And like we're sitting here now, I remember they pointed to the ground and they said this was a conference where they invited faculty, potential hires like me, and we were to look over the place, and they were looking over us, though basically they wanted to hire us, but we got a chance to see it. And they said, this is where your office is going to be. Yeah. So it was a really long time ago. The place has changed dramatically in all sorts of ways.
That was 65, this campus began, right?
The campus started, I came in 66.
Okay, so you were the second year.
Yes.
Okay.
Right, it's in Stevenson College.
Okay.
Right. Yes, no, it was special. The campus is still special in a number of ways. The beauty is literally unchanged. There are a few buildings that are a little bit odd. Why do they put that building there and so forth? But it's really a beautiful place, and I don't want to complain excessively, but there are problems as you get more and more students. The mix of students has changed. I don't mean the ethnic issue; that's all to the good. But there are a lot of students in school these days who aren't sure why they're there. In the very earliest years, Santa Cruz, if you can believe this, we were redirecting students to Berkeley. Now, there were very few students coming to Santa Cruz in those days. The first class was 600. The next class was, another college. Let me just change the subject a bit on a project that I just, I don't want to say completed, but it relates to what we're talking about. I had met about 3 years ago, Dennis Morton, who does the poetry show on KUSP. And we've become very good friends. And Dennis does a number of things with poetry, including working with kids in juvenile hall. And now actually he's working with not kids, with adults in the prisons. Same thing with respect to poetry. And at one point, Dennis showed me 5 poems that the kids had written. They're marvelous, marvelous, and each one would rip your heart out. I say that in all seriousness. And then to make a very, very long story short, I've been involved in musical activities for a long period of time. And I wound up meeting a superb composer, John Weinglass. We started talking. I told him I wanted to commission a piece, and the conclusion of that, we don't have enough time. If we had about 4 hours, I'd tell you the whole story. But on this past Saturday, at the Cabrillo Music Festival, John Weinglass's piece, Someone Else's Child, was performed for the first time using the poetry of the kids in juvenile hall.
Wow.
And you said wow, and when I tell this story,
awesome.
Everybody says wow.
Yeah.
And it is a wow, and it relates in an important way to what we've been talking about, because these are kids. We've been talking about poverty and so forth. The kids we're now talking about, the kids in juvenile hall, are really I don't know what the right word is, the most disadvantaged. I mean, they're on the streets, they're in gangs. They're not in gangs because they were born to be in gangs. Their life circumstances are, this is supposedly the wealthiest country in the world. I mean, that's a sort of ridiculous notion, because it doesn't mean anything when you've got what we've been talking about. So I want to say this is one of the best things I've ever done. I hope, and people have said, we'll see whether this piece has legs. The composer is John Weinglass. The title of the piece is Someone Else's Child. So it did introduce me. Well, I had been familiar through my friendship with Dennis Morton to the circumstances of the kids in juvenile hall. But that's another population that really is sort of hidden.
Oh, yes.
Now, there are obviously one last thing, is best I understand, and I think this is right. We have, in terms of the way juvenile halls are run, the Santa Cruz program in juvenile hall, it's considered one of the best in the state.
Yes.
So there are people, you may know that from
we have had Scott McDonald in here.
So I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Right, but I just happened then fortunately to get involved in this in a really interesting, wonderful way.
You're right. This is a model county, and it's hopefully, and I know McDonald, who is the director of probation for the county, he's exporting this model.
Right.
So he is helping to create a livable world. So we're running short on time here. I'd like you to just sort of your thoughts. How is it that, how do we do that? How, in the big picture, how do we create a livable world? Is it, economic policy, whatever? What do you think are some of the best ways to approach this issue?
Well, somebody said to me once, I always wanted to interview on television in LA. The interviewer said, "David, you are the most pessimistic person I've ever talked to." And I said, "No, I don't think so." I said, "If you're going to solve problems, you're going to have to understand what we need to do to solve the problems." And so this is a pessimistic response to what you just said, at least at the national level. Doesn't mean at the local level, by any means. We have to have leaders in this country that are willing to deal with the fundamental issues. And we just don't. And as much as I like our present president, and I'm going to vote for him, he's not, he doesn't talk about these issues. They're not popular. The gun violence that we have in this society. So
silent.
So yeah, so that's a kind of pessimistic, I guess Ralph Nader would say somehow or other, well, we need to elect people like Ralph Nader. But we don't do that in this country.
No, we don't.
Yeah. So finally, to end on a slightly brighter note, I say this, and I mean this seriously, in a world that may well be going to hell, Santa Cruz is a wonderful place to be, and there's no reason why we shouldn't try to do everything we can at a local level, even as we're plummeting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's. I agree with you. Let me just write this word down, or else I will forget to talk about it. Nader takes Barack Obama to task, and certainly the Republicans. They will never utter this word, but the word is poor. They don't use that word. He claims that no president has used it since Jimmy Carter. And NPR's Tavis Smiley called out Barack Obama and said, "Poor, say it, Mr. President, say it, poor." They don't talk about the poor. So that is a hidden, you referred to a hidden population.
Absolutely.
They are not on the national discussion. We don't talk about poor.
It's middle class.
We don't talk about poor people.
Right.
And so your response, part of your response was that we have a lack of leadership. I'm just now thinking about Occupy and that whole movement, which is a leaderless movement. And they're saying, no, our leaders have failed us. They have always failed us, and we can't look to them for solutions. We have to be the solution ourselves. So what do you see? And of course their slogan, well, the main target, Wall Street, that's obvious, Occupy Wall Street. And then tax the rich. I mean, this is one of their main themes. What do you think about Occupy?
Well, it remains to be seen. I mean, I honestly, it surely got a lot of attention. The movement got a tremendous amount of attention. And I suppose I'm not part of it, and for whatever reason I don't get involved in these kinds of activities, whether I support them or not. They may well be doing very good things. If they are, it's again at the local level. And that may be, what we all should be thinking and doing, and what I try to do. but it still remains a problem at the national level. I mean, you understand what I'm saying? It's disappointing.
Yeah.
Without any obvious solution.
Okay.
Do you have a solution?
Now,
well, how would you answer that question?
How would I answer it?
Yes.
Well, I think personally, we have this enormous disparity in wealth in this country. So, and this is a recent phenomenon since World War II, because we used to be well-funded. California was well-funded.
Absolutely.
It's the schools.
Absolutely.
And now they're not.
Right.
Why is that? Because the tax structure changed so dramatically in the 1980s. That's a big part of it right there, I think. And there's plenty of money. There's always been plenty of money. It's just how is it distributed? So I guess I would start there, but we certainly can't expect the corporatists who run this country. I mean, the government is the shadow cast by corporations. Adam Smith taught us. So we can't expect them. We have to do it ourselves. And I think that's Occupy's message. So I'm going to have to end it there. They're telling me we're out of time. So thank you for joining us tonight on Voices from the Village. Thank you to Community Television for making these facilities available to us, to our all-volunteer crew here at Voices from the Village. See you next time. Good evening.